在单元226集到230集，我们讨论了4种不同的沟通风格，以及当我们要跟他沟通时候要注意什么。那在这个月呢，也让我们继续的讨论这个主题，但是今天要让 Nick 来深度解释沟通风格的主要变因。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. At the end of last year, we talked about something that's been really important in training and managing and many parts of what we do in Presentality and Executive Plus, and that is the idea of social styles. Now, as Sherry and I are back in management positions in larger corporations, we have found that this is even more important when it comes to building a team and communicating across departments. So we wanted to revisit this topic and dive a little bit deeper into how does it work in the workplace, especially if you're a manager trying to work with your team. So across Executive Plus and EP Insights, we're going to be taking a deeper dive on how we can understand communication styles, and especially how we can utilize them best as a manager.
那在我们推出这5个单元的时候啊，其实我们后续得到了蛮多非常好的回响。那很多人也觉得真的对他们很实用，不管是在可能在管理上面，或者是对上管理、对下管理都一样。那因为刚刚 Nick 有讲到，我们现在呢也算是也是当主管，那我们的团队也增加了很多人，所以我们发现呢，这个 social styles 真的是非常的重要，而且我觉得其实很多人也很喜欢做这样子的，不管是测试或者是了解，那他们在做沟通的时候也会特别的去等于说比较 self-aware， 也会比较愿意去 reframe 或者是 restructure他们可能沟通的一些 message。 那所以呢，在这个月我们也希望重新的回到这个主题。那在我们不管是我们的 EP Podcast 或者是 EP Insights， 我们都会给大家很不一样的内容。
Of course, episodes 226 to 230 are still completely relevant and give you a great overview of the styles. So to kick this off, rather than reviewing what the 4 styles are, we want to do a little bit more about the dimensions that are used to measure these styles. Because actually understanding these dimensions, and even if you don't remember the style name or exactly where each style fits inside the quadrants, understanding these 2 dimensions will help you communicate a lot better by looking at people's very general communication behavior and understanding how to adjust to it.
那我相信很多人可能在听的时候并没有机会能够拿出你的手机，然后呢能够 click into the handouts， 然后去看一下我们这个所谓的 quadrants。 所以其实呢你们不太需要一定要去有这个 visual 的部分，你只要了解到有2个非常重要的变因，你就可以能够大概的了解到为什么有这4种不同的沟通风格。 So let's talk about these 2 really important factors in social style.
The first dimension that we usually measure someone's communication behavior on is the idea of assertiveness. Now, assertiveness is a measurement of how you like to influence other people in your communication. And we have 2 sides to this. Styles that tend to lean towards being high assertive. And high assertive is also described as tell-oriented, which means that the way that they use influence or the way they persuade people is by telling them, by being a lot more concrete, a lot more specific, and a lot more direct with what they want. Now, the other side of the scale, we would say low assertiveness, is actually ask-oriented. Now, ask-oriented doesn't mean that tell-oriented people are persuasive and influence people. What it means is that people who are more ask-oriented use questions, use things like Socratic method as a way to get people to go back and think. So their way of persuasion is not by being direct. Their way of persuasion is by asking a lot of questions and hoping that the person either gets the point or comes to their own conclusion. So these are two very different sides of the assertiveness scale.
所以简单来讲，一种就是比较喜欢问问题的人，那一种就是比较喜欢直接跟对方讲我要什么，或者你该做什么。Then I have to say though, the one thing that I've kind of realized is that, when I first heard about this, I equate this with introverts and extroverts, because people who are more extroverted tends to like to say things or tell people what to do. And to me, like people who are more introverted, they wanted to ask more questions. But then I don't really think they're the same, right?
No, actually, these would be very two different types of personality, because I think there are people out there who are very extroverted, but who are ask-oriented. So just think of great interviewers.
Okay.
Right? That doesn't mean that all great interviewers are low on assertiveness or they're extroverted. But a lot of times, someone who is willing to go out into the field and ask people a lot of questions to dig deeper into something, their communication behavior may be more on the ask-oriented, the low assertiveness side. Now, the extroversion in their personality is that they get energy from going out there and talking to new people, being in social events, but they don't typically control the conversation. They just like the atmosphere and they like asking a lot of different people new questions and learning new things.
Okay, so what you said, actually that's a keyword, control. 是不是喜欢控制的人通常都比较多的 assertiveness? They're more on the right side of the quadrant.
Actually, control is more related to how you try and control the situation. Okay. So tell-oriented assertiveness, they do control the situation by directing things. They like to feel in control because they have told people what to do. That doesn't mean that ask-oriented people don't like control. It's just how they assert their control is very, very different. So you also may know people, and this is going to be a very negative side of that, who they like to ask questions as a way to appear smarter. So they may try and pull someone into a corner where they either make themselves look stupid because they can't ask the question, or it's very clear the person asking the question knows more than they do. But instead of outright saying, oh, you really don't know what you're talking about, they will pull a person into that corner. That can still be ask-oriented.
Interesting.
This assertiveness line does really have to do with how you maintain control and how you like to persuade others. So high assertiveness, which we'll talk about certain styles, or those of you who reviewed these episodes, remember before, drivers and expressives are high assertiveness. They're tell-oriented. Versus low assertiveness, ask-oriented, maintain control or use influence and persuasion, like analyticals or amiables. They do this through an ask-oriented method. Switching gears over to responsiveness. If assertiveness is how you influence or control others, responsiveness is actually how you measure control of yourself. So responsiveness is a measure in which you see yourself as tending to control your emotions or display your emotions. We also call emoting. Emoting, if you think about emoji on your phone, like the little happy faces, to emote is actually to show how you feel. So the scale of responsiveness is how openly do you show your feelings, which actually is very high responsiveness, versus how much do you control the showing of your feelings, which would be low responsiveness.
那第二个我们就来讲到了，就是一种感知的程度。那其实很简单，就是说这个人他是不是很愿意去表现他的情绪。But I think one thing that has been very interesting is that I thought that people who are more willing to show emotions are just simply more emotional.
That would be a common misconception to say that styles with low responsiveness have no emotion. Actually, they have a lot of emotion, but what it has to do with how they want to appear in control of those emotions. So that is not to say a style like a driver and analytical doesn't feel emotions. It just means they are a lot more controlled, or they actually hesitate a lot more to show these emotions. Whereas styles like expressives or amiables, they show a lot more emotion. They hold their heart on their sleeve, as we like to say. But the reality is they're also a lot better about using their emotions to influence other people. So in the case of expressives, they can be very inspirational because they know how to harness that emotion and then get it into other people to get that inspiring feeling or that excited feeling over to other people. Amiables are also able to use their own emotion to perceive what other people are feeling and to empathize really, really well. So that controlling of emotions can actually be a big strength as opposed to something where people are just like, oh, because they're emotional, their emotions go, highs and lows, and it's very obvious. But actually, someone or a style that has this ability, they're also very good at using it as a strength in order to connect with people.
So, there is this term that people like to use here in Taiwan is EQ level, right? Would you say that people in low responsiveness, 他们有比较好的 EQ?
I would actually remove EQ from looking at how responsiveness works. One thing that's really important to understand about social styles is this is not a personality test. This is not like a strength finder, a DISC, a MBTI. Right. Social styles is actually about your outward communication behavior. It's something that people can measure and something that people can react to. So in this case, your ability for empathy can vary drastically, even within a single social style or across all of the responsiveness. What I would say is what people will notice between styles that are high responsiveness versus low responsiveness is that they make an assumption that, oh, your EQ has to do with how much you show emotion. But actually what it has to do with, you will notice, like I said, with styles that are high responsiveness and expressive or an amiable, they may have more emotion on the outside, but how empathetic they are to other people is also a big difference. So you'll notice that there are, say, expressives who can be incredibly empathetic, who can take someone's emotion and help amplify excitement, or can take someone's emotion, they can change like sadness into, a challenge, something like that. They know how to do that. Amiables can be the same. But there can also be people who have high responsiveness, who EQ is not good, and they just, like in case of an expressive, dominate someone else's emotions. They don't even recognize that it exists because they emote so much and they don't have that EQ that they will just take over a conversation. The reverse would be, let's say, an analytical, typically a very reserved, a very in control style of their emotions. They can actually have very high EQ. And because analyticals typically pay more attention to information than other styles, they can usually, maybe it sounds a little weird, but they can very logically talk with someone about what they're feeling and help them realize where they're getting stuck and get them out of, let's say, a rut. So they can have very high EQ, but without having to show a lot of emotion.
那我稍微整理一下刚刚 Nick 所讲的，因为我就稍微用中文的一些 definition， 所以刚刚 Nick 就也提到了这4种不同的风格，那所以分别是分析型 analytical， 行动型也就是 driver， 表现型就是我们所谓的 expressive， 那和蔼型就是 amiable。
Now that we've overviewed these 2 different dimensions, we actually want to get a little bit into how do you identify when you're viewing these different dimensions. Some parts of this may feel very obvious. For example, that tell versus ask in terms of how someone controls a situation, or that willing to control emotion versus very open with emotion. There are areas of these that seem very obvious, but we want to talk a little bit about how do you identify those subtleties? Because there may be times where you're just looking and be like, I think this person's more assertive, but I'm not really sure, versus someone who is very obviously assertive.
So I'm going to give you guys an example. Now, you guys know that Nick and I host the shows for 3 years. 那我们在这个之外，我们也常常 train together, we like manage team together. 但你知道吗？因为我们都是在 high assertiveness 的 spectrum, right? We tend to tell people what to do, or we tend to want to tell, we're tell-oriented. 当我们两个在共事的时候，其实呢，有的时候我发现我一定要憋住，不要讲太多话。And sometimes it's a little bit hard for me because obviously when we like host together, when we train together, I have to leave you time to speak. And it's like emotionally, that has been something that I'm like, okay, Sherry, just shut up. Let him talk. Just bite your tongue. Don't ask questions. Just let him talk.
This is a great example of what happens when you put 2 very high assertiveness, tell-oriented styles together, which is when you're building that cooperation, you have to leave room for both people to talk. And I would say that this is more on the easy to identify side of how can you tell whether someone is high assertiveness or not. But another thing that's really interesting about Sherry and I's situation is that Sherry is a certified coach. I am a trained facilitator. Part of our own training is about listening, asking really good questions, and letting someone else talk in order to explore either how they feel or explore ideas as a group, which would seem very contradictory towards our communication behavior. But one of these things where you can, again, see that subtlety between is someone operating on their training versus someone's default communication behavior is how they respond after this thing. So, for example, I'm a trained facilitator. I have been taught that when I am meeting a new person, or in my case, when I talk to startups for the first time, probably the first half an hour of me meeting a startup will just be me asking a lot of questions and pulling information. But the moment I feel I have enough information to talk, I will start very directly giving advice. I will talk about, I heard this is how you should use it. You talked about this is how you should present it. So when it comes to my portion of speaking, there's a separation between my asking mode and my speaking mode. And when it comes to my speaking mode, I am very assertive. High assertive oriented. I'm very tell oriented. I use a lot of influence and persuasion to tell people what I think. This will also be true in meetings. Like in meetings, I may not talk for a very early part of that meeting, but once it's my turn to talk, the way I construct information and the way I talk is very high assertiveness. So this is one of those things where don't mistake that because someone asks a question, they're low assertiveness versus someone who doesn't ask questions. It actually has to do with it's really their turn to communicate. Where do they lean?
So as an expressive, we tend to like to get that emotions from the other side and we feed off from that emotion. 但有的时候我们会发现说，有些人就是很慢熟，他好像没有太多的喜欢不喜欢，或者是他就是好像没有办法马上跟你很熟，马上跟你 connect， or 可能他比较不喜欢去跟你讲说他 对什么事情特别的 for example, they really think something's going well or something's not going well, they're a bit hesitant to have a black and white answer. Usually, I think that is more analytical. Right? To me, that's how I observe someone that's like completely opposite of me.
This is jumping into that second dimension of responsiveness in terms of controlled emotion versus more open emotion. So, Sherry, in your case, because you're very high on the responsiveness, you both emote, but also you get a lot of energy or feedback based on how other people are reacting. And then you have that low responsiveness side, let's say an analytical, where they're a lot more controlled with this emotion, and perhaps they're looking more at like the facts or the figures behind whether something is going well or not. Now, one thing really to notice on this responsiveness level, as what Sherry's pointing out, is that's a lot clearer. If you ask someone like, how do you feel? And they're just like, well, I think it's okay. But you don't hear like the excitement or that the emotion behind that statement. For that person, they may think like, oh yeah, it's going really well. But that's not how they show things. Now, one thing that people who are high on responsiveness can do or start to notice is that, okay, if you just take that surface thing, like, oh, I think it's okay, then you may not feel that excitement that you're looking for. But especially people who are on low responsiveness, to notice that emotional level is just ask them to be specific. You know, oh, what is something that you think went really well? Or what is something that concerned you? Then you'll actually start to get a level or degree of excitement. Now, the difficult part of this, what I was talking about before, is when you brought up the idea of EQ. People with low responsiveness can have very good EQ. They can actually pick up your emotion, and how they respond to that will have more to do with the EQ side. But when it comes to just pure observation, you can just kind of see someone's range between, do they get excited? The other thing to really notice in their behavior is word choice. So in the case of someone who is low responsiveness, but they do want to show excitement, they may not be like, oh, that was fantastic. It was amazing. It was incredible. They may say something more along like, I feel that was really something new or special, right? Special can have a lot of degrees of nuance. But if they say something is special, they may actually mean it more than if they're like, oh, that's okay. Like, okay, maybe there's not a problem, but it's really not that exciting.
Yeah.
And so word choice, when it comes to low responsiveness, you can start to pull apart like how excited or how upset they are, because the range will be small, but they will typically change their wording choice. We hope that this overview of these two dimensions gives you more color into how we're going to talk about each individual style, and especially how it comes to managing when you are a particular style. But the first part of social styles and why we like this so much is about its outward communication, its outward behavior, which means you can start to understand, even if the other person hasn't taken a test, you can start to observe, how do they control the situation? Do they try and push a lot more influence, or do they try and ask in order to assert influence? Or you can start to look at how much do they control or openly show their emotion and their ability to use that emotion to influence other people, whether it's by being open with the emotion and using that inspiration, or whether it's being controlled with that emotion, try to calm the situation. These are things that are really important when it comes to understanding and identifying people on your team, what style they are, and then how to best use your style to talk to them. So join us in the EP Insights, where we're first going to talk about, if you're a driver, how do you use that to work with your team? We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.